Welcome to this Gearwig video tutorial on free strikes in Warmachine. In Warmachine, melee combat is a dangerous place to be wandering into and out of. The free strike mechanic restricts a model's movement in melee. It makes melee combat seem sticky. Let's look at the specifics of a free strike. We'll look at exactly when it occurs, where it occurs, and how to resolve certain special effects tied to the attacks. A model can make a free strike attack when an enemy model in its melee range advances outside of its melee range. The attack occurs as soon as the enemy model advances out of the original model's melee range. It interrupts the enemy model's movement. It is resolved, and then the movement can continue. Free strikes only occur when an enemy model advances out of a melee range, not if that enemy model is pushed, slammed, placed, like with a telekinesis spell, or any other way moved outside except advancing. An advance is defined as any sort of movement where the controlling player is moving intentionally, unlike, say, a push or a slam. And again, place effects do not count as movement, so they do not provoke free strikes. So if our charger here wanted to advance away from the feral warpwolf he is in melee with, intending to move, say, down here, he would take a free strike because he's leaving the melee range of the warpwolf, and he would take that free strike right here, as soon as he left the feral's melee range, which is 1/2 inch. So at exactly 1/2 inch away from the wolf, the attack would be resolved. Note that a model's melee range is only measured from his front arc. So models that are completely in his back arc are not in his melee range. Thus, Reinhold here, who is completely within the back arc, can advance away like this and not suffer a free strike. He gets away clean, because he was never in the feral's melee range to begin with. And free strikes only occur when an enemy model advances from inside a model's melee range out of it. A model's melee range is measured by the range of his longest weapon. Our Warpwolf Stalker here has two weapons. He has a fist and a sword. The fist has the normal 1/2 inch melee range, but the sword has reach, so it has a 2-inch range. So when we're measuring the Warpwolf Stalker's melee range, we use 2 inches. So our Lancer here could advance, end up moving to a spot like this, and not take a free strike. He is still within 2 inches of the Warpwolf Stalker, so he is still in the Warpwolf Stalker's melee range. Free strikes only happen when a model in another model's melee range leaves that range, and he hasn't yet, even though he has left the range of one of his weapons. A model can only make a free strike against enemy models. It cannot take a free strike against a friendly model that leaves his melee range. Our Stalker here couldn't take a swing on this feral that's advancing away from him, even if somehow swinging on his own friendly ally would benefit the player somehow. This is not allowed. This rule comes up a lot with spells and effects that take control of enemy models. If you cast a spell that takes control of an enemy's warjack and then start moving that warjack around, you don't get to take free strikes on that warjack, because as you are controlling it, you are the controlling player, and it will count as a friendly model during that movement. So you won't get to generate your own free strikes by moving your enemy's models around. When making a free strike, the model makes one normal melee attack using a weapon in range of the target model. The model cannot use a special attack or star attack. It must be a normal attack. Also, since the free strike doesn't occur during the model's activation, the attack roll cannot be boosted by spending focus or by forcing the model. All free strikes receive a +2 bonus to their attack rolls. Additionally, all free strike damage rolls are automatically boosted. Free strikes tend to hit hard. All free strikes are considered to originate from the target model's back arc, although free strikes do not receive the backstrike bonus. They already get a +2 to hit just for being a free strike. This can matter sometimes. Some models are immune to the backstrike bonus. If you free strike these models, you still do get the +2 to hit though. The +2 bonus applies to all free strike attack rolls. Free strike attacks and any special abilities tied to those attacks are all immediately resolved as soon as the advancing enemy model leaves the melee range, at the edge of the melee range. Once the attack is resolved, the model can continue advancing. As we saw in the last example, our Warpwolf Stalker has a 2-inch melee range, because one of his weapons has reach. So, if our charger here wanted to advance away from the Warpwolf Stalker, he would end up suffering a free strike, and that free strike would be at the maximum melee range for the Stalker, which would be right here. When a model makes a free strike, he must use a weapon in range of the target model. At this range, the Stalker can only use his sword. His fist attack has a 1/2-inch melee range, and that is well out of range, so he has no choice but to make his free strike with his sword weapon. That's not a problem for him. His sword is his best weapon, and that's the weapon he'd prefer to make free strikes with anyway. That is often the case with reach models. Their best weapon happens to have reach. Occasionally, we'll see a model, like the Convergence Inverter, that has a reach weapon and then a much more powerful standard range weapon with just a 1/2-inch melee range. In a situation like this, even though the Inverter might want to make a free strike with his big powerful weapon, he'd have to use the weapon with reach because that's the only one in range. It is possible to provoke a free strike such that the Stalker could choose between both of its weapons. If Reinhold here decided to keep advancing forward, off in, say, this direction, he'd provoke a free strike by leaving the melee range, and that free strike would occur right here, just as he's leaving the Stalker's melee range. Again, the Stalker would get to make a free strike, and he'd have to pick a weapon attack that was in range. Since Reinhold is clearly within 1/2 inch, he can choose between his sword or his fist in this particular example. Let's look at some special examples where resolving a free strike affects the way the target model moves. Our Lancer here wants to charge this feral Warpwolf. To do so, he'll have to leave the melee range of the Stalker, and then he'll take a free strike. He can begin his charge, but as soon as he gets to the maximum reach range of the Stalker, this spot, we will resolve a free strike against him. Of course, that attack roll will have a +2 bonus because it's a free strike, and it will be automatically boosted, so it will do a bunch of damage. Worse yet for the Lancer, all free strikes are considered to originate from the back arc. The Lancer has a shield that gives him +2 armor, but shields don't work when attacks originate from the Lancer's back arc. So this free strike will be automatically boosted, and it will ignore his shield. After the attack is resolved, the Lancer can continue his charge. But we must completely resolve the attack and all the effects with the attack. If the free strike crippled the Lancer's spear, for instance, then the Lancer would roll 1 less die for his attack and damage roll when he made the charge attack against the feral Warpwolf. Worse yet, if the free strike crippled the Lancer's movement, his charge would immediately end. The Warjack rules state that when a Warjack's movement is crippled, he cannot run or charge. It goes on to say that if he is in the middle of a run or charge when his movement is crippled, that run or charge immediately ends. So if that happened to this Lancer here, his movement would end at this exact spot, at the maximum reach of the Warpwolf Stalker, because his movement was crippled. Let's try a similar situation, but we'll replace the Warpwolf Stalker with this Wold Guardian. The Guardian does not have any reach weapons, so his melee range is the typical 1/2 inch. If the Lancer decided to charge the feral again, he would take a free strike. He would move along his charge until he left the Guardian's melee range, which is only a 1/2 inch out like this, and then we would resolve the free strike. The Guardian's weapon has a special rule called Ram. When this weapon hits, the target is immediately knocked down and can be pushed an inch directly away from the Guardian. When the free strike hits, the Lancer will be knocked down. We can choose not to push him if we like, and then we'll resolve damage like normal. Once the free strike is resolved, the Lancer can continue his advance like normal, but of course he's been knocked down, and models that are knocked down cannot advance or attack or take actions. So the Lancer's unfortunate activation ends like this, with his face in the dirt. Let's try it one more time with an enemy Swamp Horror nearby. The Swamp Horror has 4 weapons. He has a high damage beak attack that does not have reach, and he has 3 tentacle attacks that do have reach. If our Lancer again tried an ill-advised charge against our Feral, he wouldn't provoke a free strike until he left the Swamp Horror's maximum reach range, like this. The Swamp Horror would not be able to make the free strike with his high damage beak attack because it is out of range. He'll have to use one of his tentacles. But the tentacles have a special rule called pull. When a tentacle attack hits, after the attack is resolved, the target model can be pushed directly toward the Swamp Horror. So on a hit, our poor Lancer here gets dragged right back to the Swamp Horror like this. He'll suffer damage, and then the free strike is resolved. Now he could normally continue his charge. Unfortunately, the charge rules state that a charging model's movement immediately ends if it is pushed, slammed, or thrown. And in this case, our Lancer was just pushed toward the Swamp Horror as per the pull special rule. So his charge immediately ends, and he ends up in this crappy spot right in beak chomping range. Models with Gunfighter are allowed to make free strikes with their ranged weapons. The Gunfighter advantage gives a model a half-inch melee range. It allows that model to make ranged attacks while it is in melee, as long as those attacks target a model it is in melee with. When firing on a model it is in melee with, a model with Gunfighter does not suffer the firing into melee penalty. Although if it misses such an attack, there is still a chance that ranged attack hits another model involved in the melee, as per the firing into melee rules. For more on these rules, you can check our video tutorial on firing into melee. When a Gunfighter makes a free strike with one of its ranged weapons, it does not get the +2 bonus that free strikes normally get. This is specifically only applied to melee attacks. It does, oddly, get automatically boosted damage like a normal free strike. The rule does not specifically say this bonus only applies to melee attacks. This seems like a quirk in the rules, but it has not been errated and has been verified by infernal rulings. Just like normal, a Gunfighter's free strikes are resolved as soon as the model leaves the Gunfighter's melee range, which would be at 1/2 inch. Unless the Gunfighter also had a reach weapon, in which case its melee range would be considered 2 inches, and it could make ranged attacks throughout that 2-inch range. Our Wold Weird here has no melee attack, but has a ranged attack with the Gunfighter advantage. If the Lancer decided to back out of the Weird's melee range, like this, he would suffer a free strike. That free strike would occur at the maximum melee range, at 1/2 inch, just like this. The attack would not receive the +2 bonus to the attack roll because it's not a melee attack, but its damage would automatically be boosted. And the attack would be considered to have originated from the Lancer's back arc, so the Lancer would not get his shield bonus. Even though the Lancer was backing out, it is still considered to come from behind him. In fact, there's really no backing out in Warmachine. Every time you advance, you're always supposed to directly face the direction you're advancing. And then, of course, when you're done advancing, you can change your facing. So while he's moving away from the Wold Weird, it's like he's facing away. Regardless, free strikes are always considered to originate from the back arc. Because it is a ranged attack being fired into melee, there is a chance, on a miss, that it could hit another target. A miss cannot potentially hit the original attacker or the original target, but it can potentially hit anyone the target is engaging and any models those models are engaging. So the Lancer is engaging the Feral Warpwolf, so the missed attack could potentially hit him, and he's engaging the Charger, so that's another potential target. In the event of a miss, we'd randomize between those two potential secondary targets, and then we'd re-roll the attack roll against them. The Gunfighter advantage only allows you to ignore the firing into melee penalty when you are in melee with the target. Our Weird is not in melee with his ally, the Feral Warpwolf, and he's not in melee with the Charger up there. When he re-rolled his attack on a secondary target, he would suffer the firing into melee penalty. Free strikes serve as a powerful incentive to stay in melee once you're there. It's rarely a good idea to slide around and take free strikes willy-nilly because they hit so hard, and their side effects can be so devastating. During those rare occasions where you do need to scramble away from a combat, expect the free strike to hit much more often than not, and to do some serious damage. Always be aware of the special rules tied to the free strikes you may be taking, so you don't end up flat on your face or covered in tentacles. Remember also that free strikes are optional. If your opponent provokes a free strike, you don't necessarily have to take it. Sometimes taking the free strike is bad, as it will make your incorporeal model suddenly corporeal, or cause your demolisher's arms to open up and his armor bonus to drop. The free strike mechanic adds some fun tactical thinking to melee combat. Instead of simply removing your model's ability to move, you are given that choice, but with severe ramifications. You have to make risk-reward judgments, and I think that's pretty cool. Thank you for watching. For more guides, battle reports, and articles, check out Gearwig.com. You can email me at boss@gearwig.com, or check out our Facebook or Twitter pages. If you want to help the site, tell a friend, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.